from the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast.
Coming up on a special edition of Ag Day, the Secretary of Agriculture shares his plans for USDA.
I believe it's my job to translate their concerns, their desires, their wishes to him and to his policymakers and to Congress as well, certainly.
Across the mall, the EPA leadership takes a farmer-friendly turn. Plans are pushing forward for immigration reform, including a new guest worker program, and history plows into the Smithsonian.
Ag Day, brought to you by the Chevy Silverado, the most dependable, longest-lasting full-size pickups on the road.
Good morning and welcome to a special edition of Ag Day. I'm Clinton Griffiths. Today we're taking time to hear from several of our key leaders in Washington. Last month, I traveled with a delegation from Missouri Farm Bureau to the heart of D.C. Now, every year, they bring agricultural leaders from across their state for in-depth discussions with policy analysts, advocates, and legislators. It's a diverse cross-section of the industry bent on taking time to focus on the issues at hand. One of those key figures, Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue. He took time to sit down with Ag Day to talk about his perspective on running farm country.
You've been in Washington almost a year now. How does it feel? Have you gotten used to it?
I hope that's not the expectation, to get used to Washington. I don't think our constituency wants us to get used to Washington. I think they want me to be out and about, and we clicked off 34 states this last week and North Dakota. So we're getting around and out in the hinterlands and the farmlands and fields of America, the forests of America, to really hear what's on the hearts and minds of our constituency, the producers of America.
And what have you heard from folks out there? I mean, is there an overall theme?
There is no overall theme. There's a lot of anxiety out there. Commodity prices, again, continue to fall. It's a lot of economic anxiety, a lot of anxiety over trade, over a labor force, and over regulation. And this is a burdened economic situation we find our agriculture in today, and people are hurting. Now, farmers they're strong, they're resilient, they're optimistic, they're faithful, and it takes all of that to put that seed in the ground every spring, but they're dutifully anxious about their situation.
How does that translate into your mindset when you're here in Washington and visiting with some of the folks, you know, here making decisions and things that will affect their lives?
Well, the way I view it, I have an audience of one with the president, but I really have an audience to represent him, the thousands of producers across the country. I believe it's my job to translate their concerns, their desires, their wishes to him and to his policymakers and to Congress as well, certainly.
You mentioned trade being a big one. Where do you feel like we stand today on this issue of trade and the nervousness that's out there in the countryside?
Well, I think we stand on the precipice of a cliff, and hopefully we can see our way clear and be safe. Obviously, the president left the campaign trail believing that all of America disliked NAFTA, and I think he's found out since that NAFTA from the agriculture community was a benefit generally. We've seen exports grow, we've seen relationships grow, not every sector of agriculture, but virtually most of the sectors.
Now, I heard a story once on NAFTA about you walking into the White House with a map. Is that a true story?
It has a lot of basis in fact. I had not been sworn in. I think it was the week I was sworn in, and I was called and said, Sonny, what would happen if we withdrew from NAFTA? I said, well, it'd be devastating. They said, well, you better get over to the White House then. So we took a couple of charts with us to show the president how well he was thought of in the heartland and how much they depended on the trade resulting from NAFTA. And I like to talk about President Trump. While we all know him to be a very forceful, decisive, move ahead sooner rather than later leader, he also, like any good leader, has sort of a back door in the back. He was ready to withdraw from NAFTA, and he tells me he already had it drafted, but he listened and he changed his mind in that instant, and I think that's the essence of a good leader.
What's your goal for your tenure?
Well, it's the same broad vision we had when we got here. Most citizens are not used to being served as customers. They're used to be treated as funders, that way. And then the receivers of whatever policy comes. My goal is for the United States Department of Agriculture to be the most efficient, the most effective, the most customer-focused agency in the federal government. And we want to be judged that way by our customers out in the field, the farmers, the ranchers, the foresters of America who grow what I believe is the most valuable commodity in the world. That's our food.
Up next, we'll hear from the administrator of the EPA and why he says it's time for his agency to stop battling America's farmers and ranchers. And later, get the latest on a new guest worker program from the legislator's author. And we'll stop by the Smithsonian, now calling 2018 the year of the tractor.
With a uniquely powerful formulation of proven ingredients, Resicor corn herbicide gives you extraordinary power.
Who wants dessert?
At least when it comes to weeds.
To say farmers and ranchers have had an adversarial relationship with the EPA over the past decade might be putting it nicely, but the agency's new boss, Oklahoman Scott Pruitt, a man who once fought furiously against its policies, is now trying to change that perception. It's been about a year. You've been in office here. You've been traveling around the country talking with different folks. What is the message that you've heard from America's farmers and ranchers?
Well, there's much optimism across the country, I think, in light of the President's leadership and the changes that we're making at the EPA. I think the agency before the President's election and before our arrival there was weaponized to a certain degree and actually looked at farmers and ranchers not as partners but as adversaries. And I think that was translated into a lot of different rules. Obviously, there are some that are more egregious than others. But I think that the attitude by which the agency conducted itself and not working with farmers and ranchers in a constructive and partnering way didn't achieve good outcomes for the environment and also didn't help inform decisions in a proper manner. So we're fixing that and fixing it, I think, through better attitudes of saying that we understand that farmers and ranchers are our first conservationists, that they're our first environmentalists, that they care about the land, the air they breathe and the water they drink, and they want to make sure, I mean, their greatest asset is their land. And they want to pass that to future generations with stewardship, mentality. And I get that, and we're trying to make sure that as we do rulemaking, that we incorporate that into our processes.
Has that been a cultural challenge? I mean, because you're right, farmers and ranchers have felt like there's been that adversarial role on both sides. And you mentioned even having farmers come to the EPA to visit, which is new, I think, a new thought for most of them.
I think it has been cultural. I think it's unfortunate because I think, again, it's this mentality that we've lived within for the last decade or so, that though we've been blessed with tremendous natural resources, there are some on the environmental left that just simply says, don't use those natural resources, put up fences, do not touch. And look, that's just never where we've been as a country. We've always recognized as a country that to whom much is given, much is required, that we have an opportunity, an obligation, some would say, to feed the world, and we are in fact feeding the world, that the natural resources that we've been blessed with help power the world. So whether it's energy or otherwise, we have an obligation, in my view, as a country to recognize that stewardship should drive those decisions and not prohibition.
Yeah. As we talk about some of the projects, the regulations and legislation that's been going through the EPA, WOTUS has been a big one. You're taking a very different approach, this administration taking a very different approach to that. In fact, we could have more clarity on that this year, right?
Yeah, we'll have a final rule this year. A final rule meaning that we'll have a substitute or replacement definition. I mean, as you know, we've actually had two different rules in the marketplace, at least at this point. One is rescinding that 2015 rule, that 2015 definition of what a wild United States is. And then we've got a substitute definition that provides the answer going forward, because we need to provide an answer. The answer needs to recognize private property ownership. It needs to recognize the role of states. It needs to hew and actually look at that statute, the Clean Water Act, and ask and answer the question, what is intended by a water of the United States? What does that mean? And it doesn't mean a Tri Creek bed. It doesn't mean an ephemeral drainage ditch. It doesn't mean a prairie pothole in North Dakota. I mean, it means something much more like a traditionally navigable water because of interstate commerce and the rest, and the intent that the Clean Water Act ingrained into the language of the statute, recognizing the role of the states and in these matters. So we're going to get that right going forward, and the definition is going to provide clarity, objective measurements by which we know where federal jurisdiction begins and ends. That's what's needed. But make no mistake, I mean, this decision made before our arrival on WOTUS, that rule that we are rescinding, that I believe was so deficient, it was truly about power and jurisdiction ultimately. It was about making sure that an agency in Washington, D.C. had jurisdiction over how you use land in states across the country in ways that had never been contemplated before. So that's wrong. We're fixing that. We're getting rid of the deficient rule, but we're providing clarity going forward on what our responsibilities are and recognizing the role of the states and private property owners.
All right, Mike Hoffman joins us with our extended weather forecast next, and later a tractor helping cultivate American history.
Welcome back to Ag Day. I'm meteorologist Mike Hoffman on this Monday morning after Easter. Still very dry. Southwest Kansas into northwestern Texas. Drought monitor is getting worse and worse, and unfortunately there's no real end in sight to that dry weather. That extends back into the Four Corner region as well. Some dry areas in the southeast, a few dry areas kind of lingering in the far northern plains, but we're seeing more moisture in those areas as well coming up. Now going back a month, you can see it was already getting pretty dry in these areas, but overall it's continuing to get worse and worse because we're just not getting any moisture. We're getting moisture in eastern Texas, just not areas west of there, and that's sometimes typical. Once you get into a pattern like this, the drought just kind of keeps expanding upon itself. Here's the jet stream, and you can see most of the energy is going to be through the northern tier of states. There's Tuesday on into the latter parts of the week. There's pieces of energy moving around this big area of low pressure in the upper atmosphere in eastern Canada. But beyond that, we don't see a lot of energy coming southwestward. But at the very end, next weekend, it is trying to show a cutoff low forming in the southwest. That's the first time it's shown that, so we'll have to see if that happens or not. But we're going through a pattern transition here, and that's why we're seeing some changes. So temperatures this week, below normal, central northern plains, Great Lakes, down to the Ohio Valley, northeast, above normal the far southeast, and also much of the southwest, southern Texas. Precipitation this week, below normal, far northern plains, southwest, above normal then from the central and southern Mississippi Valley throughout the northeast and also into the northwest. 90-day outlook. We'll go month by month here for April temperatures. Below normal still from the Great Lakes, northern half of the plains. Above normal southeast, Louisiana on through the southwest. May temperatures, I should say. Here we get rid of the cold air. We do think we go into a warmer pattern from the southwestern Great Lakes all the way through the southern tier of states above normal, below normal eastern Montana. That kind of continues a while into June as well, but above normal temperatures expected for New England, most of the central and southern Mississippi Valley back into the southwest. Precipitation, more of the same. Above normal, Mississippi Valley into the Great Lakes, below normal in most of the southwest. That's a look across the country. Now let's take a look at some local forecasts. Needles, California, first of all, very warm with lots of sunshine, high of 92 degrees. Abilene, Texas, variably cloudy, chance of a thunderstorm, high 77. And finally, Burlington, Vermont, partly sunny, rather chilly, high of 42 degrees.
What would a new guest worker program look like? We'll talk about it coming up as our Ag Day on the Hill special continues. And later, 100 years ago, this tractor was making history. Today, it's part of history. Welcome back to our special edition of Ag Day on the Hill. Immigration reform has been a key talking point in Washington for decades now. And up until a month ago, many corners of the country expected major reforms to be tied to the omnibus spending bill passed last month. But a Supreme Court decision has eased pressure on dreamers and pushed immigration out of the spotlight. But work continues, including work on a new guest worker program. The bill's author, Representative Bob Goodland of Virginia, shares the details. Why don't we start by talking about the Ag Act and give us just kind of an overview of how it's different than what we currently have.
So we took the opportunity to write what I think is a very, very good bill that looks at this problem from the perspective of the farmer. We take this program away from the Department of Labor and turn it over to the Department of Agriculture, where the new Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, is very excited about what we're doing. It also ends some of the requirements of the H-2A program, like having to provide transportation, housing, having to deal with the so-called adverse effect wage rate, which is a bureaucrat's dream, to tell farmers the ideal amount of money they need to be paying to assure that they'll get American workers to fill positions where it is extremely difficult to find American workers, and they've got to have guest workers. We want them to be legal, however. We also have a problem for those sectors of agriculture that can't even qualify for the current H-2A program. Dairy farmers, they need workers year-round, not just to harvest a seasonal crop. The most important thing of all is that it gives the control over this to the farmer, not to bureaucrats, because they get to self-certify their need. It's also a wonderful opportunity for people who are working hard in agriculture but are not lawfully present in the United States, because they're going to be given an opportunity to very easily become lawful, not with a pathway to citizenship, but simply allowing them to get legal with a guest worker program that is good for 2 years at a time. In dairy and in the raw food processing plants, it's 3 years. And I think that's a great thing for them as well. Two concerns that have been expressed have been the overall cap, but that is an easy one to explain. This cap, this program, allows 900,000 or more workers over the first 2 years of the program, plus it will not count anybody in the current H-2A program who converts over. That doesn't count against the cap. And anybody who's unlawfully here and does the touchback and gets lawful, they also don't count against that cap. Then, if the cap is ever met, and I don't believe it will, but if it's ever met, then there's an automatic 10% increase. The other area where they've expressed some concern about is the touchback. In this bill, we do two really important things. One, we give them the necessary documentation so that they know before they leave that they're going to be able to come back again. They will not have to go to a U.S. consulate. They can go to any country outside the United States. They simply have to give proof that they have left the country and re-entered, which they can get with a stamp or a document when they present those papers that allow them back in. And then, in addition, we, in this legislation, make sure that what are called the 3-year and 10-year bars are removed. They're waived, only for agriculture guest workers.
Now you can see the entire interview with Representative Goodlatte on agweb.com. Up next, the tractor in Washington is catching the attention of visitors.
In the Country, sponsored by Kubota. Tractors, hay tools, utility vehicles, mowers, and more. Visit KubotaUSA.com today.
Washington, D.C. is celebrating the business of agriculture in 2018, but you won't find that story without a trip to the Smithsonian. Under the lights, around a corner at the National Museum of American History, sits the beginning of a revolution.
It is amazing. The colors are beautiful.
A 1918 John Deere Waterloo boy perched atop a platform 100 years since it first began changing the way America farms.
Entrepreneurs, manufacturers, and tinkerers as farmers really changed the technology of farming and changed the way farming happened.
A story being told at the museum's American Enterprise exhibit.
The curators for American Enterprise exhibition were really intentional about including agriculture and especially agricultural technology to help people who are largely not farmers today or are, distant several generations from a farming past, understand farming and understand the history of farming as really a crucible of innovation.
From the earliest days of the tractor, the display shows the battle between equipment makers and automobile manufacturers like Ford. They made the Fordson tractor, which in 1923 sold 75% of all the tractors purchased that year.
Who would be the leading force? Would it be automobile manufacturers or would it be equipment manufacturers? So they're competing for that territory, and I think those two tractors really get at that.
Today, that battle is over precision agriculture. The display including innovative moments in the history of the industry, like GPS and drones.
How new technologies are helping farmers really see their fields, their crops, their products in different ways, and helping them be more efficient in their planning and how they manage the land.
Technology now common for farmers, but fascinating for visitors, getting a picture of the moments shaping our future. The National Museum of American History says the Waterloo Boy will be on exhibit for the next year, so come take a look. That's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in for this special edition of Ag Day. From all of us here, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day.